The courtroom was packed, its walls heavy with silence and tension. Cameras clicked softly. Journalists sat shoulder to shoulder, their notepads ready. The hearing was being live-streamed across the country. Everyone watching knew this was no ordinary case. At the center stood Rachel Monroe, a calm and confident civil rights attorney. Dressed in a dark gray suit and speaking with quiet strength, Rachel was known for taking on powerful institutions. But today was different. She wasn't just defending a person, she was defending a truth the world wasn't ready to hear. Across from her sat Judge Malcolm Strickland, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a record of never losing control in his courtroom. But even his calm exterior seemed to crack as Rachel continued to speak. Rachel was representing someone, only known as Echo, a whistleblower from Zenith Global Defense, a massive private contractor with connections deep in the U.S. government. No one had seen Echo, no photos, no voice recordings. But the files Echo had released were explosive. Rachel stood firm at the podium. These documents, she said, holding up a thick binder, showed direct involvement of Zenith Global in illegal surveillance programs targeting both U.S. citizens and foreign diplomats. We're looking at violations of not only national law, but international human rights. Strickland leaned forward. Counselor, I remind you, this is a pretrial motion hearing. Stay within the bounds of your argument. Rachel didn't flinch. Your Honor, the defense must be allowed to present context. Without context, we cannot understand motive. And without motive, we cannot speak of justice. The judge's fingers tapped against the bench. The room was still. Cameras zoomed in. The court does not allow political theater, Judge Strickland said, his voice harder now. You're off topic. Shut up. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Rachel blinked slowly. She could feel every eye on her. The judge had just publicly tried to silence her. Live. She stepped closer to the mic. Her voice was even lower now, but every word carried weight. No, Your Honor, she said clearly. I will not be silenced. Not when lives were destroyed. Not when truth has been buried under classified lies. This is not theater. This is a courtroom. And in court, evidence must be heard. The courtroom froze. The judge's face turned a shade paler. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably. In their seats, somewhere in the back, a journalist whispered into her phone. She just flipped the whole thing. Across social media, the clip exploded within minutes. #ShutUpJudge began trending worldwide. Within hours, major networks picked it up. Who is Rachel Monroe? What is Zenith Global hiding? Is this the trial that brings down the silence machine? Outside the courthouse, protesters began gathering. Some held signs that read, Echo speaks, others, silence is complicity. Inside, Rachel was ordered into chambers, away from cameras, but the damage was done. The words had been spoken. The world had heard her. And somewhere, far from the courtroom, someone watched the live feed in a darkened hotel room. A person wearing a hoodie and gloves. The mysterious Echo. They whispered to the screen, she did it. The first gate is open. The battle had only just begun. The footage from the courtroom had already been viewed over 10 million times. News anchors debated the moment frame by frame, trying to understand who this woman was that dared to defy a federal judge on live television. But while the media buzzed, Rachel Monroe sat in silence in a small, dimly lit conference room inside. The courthouse, her hands were folded, her jaw was tight. Across from her sat two Department of Justice officials and a court mediator. One of them leaned forward, voice low but sharp. You're not just playing with fire, Ms. Monroe. You're throwing gasoline on the system. Rachel replied calmly, then maybe the system shouldn't have been built on dry wood. They dismissed her with threats of contempt and misconduct charges. But it didn't matter. The truth was already out. That night, Rachel met with Imran Latif, an investigative journalist from Al Jazeera English. He had flown in from London after seeing the courtroom video. They met at a quiet diner near Union Station. "You just made yourself the most dangerous woman in Washington," Imran said, sipping his coffee. "Now tell me, who is Echo?" Rachel pulled out a sealed folder. Echo worked for Zenith Global as a cybersecurity strategist. They were hired by several governments for defense projects. But their real job was monitoring political opponents, activists, even journalists. Imran raised an eyebrow. "So, digital surveillance?" Rachel nodded, and worse. Echo uncovered a protocol, something called silent wire. It wasn't just spying. It was erasing records, emails, digital IDs. People who spoke out started disappearing or being discredited, fired, diagnosed as unstable. Set up, Imran slowly placed his phone on the table and turned it off. He understood the weight. "Now an Echo?" he asked. "She's still alive," Rachel said. "But she won't be for long if we don't make the next move fast." Imran tapped the folder. "And you want this leaked?" Rachel shook her head. "Not all of it, not yet. First, we need public attention. A name, a headline, exposed just enough to force Senate oversight. The rest comes after." Imran opened the folder. Inside were screenshots, internal emails, access logs, and a list of codenames, one of them being Strickland. His eyes widened. The judge, Rachel, nodded. "Echo says he's not just biased, he's placed." At that moment, Imran's phone vibrated, even though it was powered down. The screen flashed once and then went black. Rachel stood up quickly, there watching. They left the diner without finishing their drinks. A black SUV sat across. The street engine running, they didn't look back. Later that night, Imran broadcast a teaser on Al Jazeera's YouTube channel. "Tomorrow, we begin our investigation into Zenith Global Defense, an American company accused of silencing whistleblowers through psychological warfare and judicial manipulation. A new leak suggests foreign governments may have been involved." The world took notice. In Europe, leaders were briefed behind closed doors. In the Middle East, state networks scrambled to adjust their narratives. In Washington, the White House issued a vague statement. National security concerns must not override the rule of law. But it was too late for vague words. The storm had started. Somewhere in a Berlin apartment, Echo sat by a window, watching the streetlights flicker. She wore glasses, her hair short, dyed brown. She had not used her real name in months. She opened her laptop and sent Rachel a one-line message. "They'll try to bury you next." Rachel received the message while walking back to her apartment, security detail following quietly behind. She paused, looked up at the night sky, and whispered, "Let them try." The next day, subpoenas were issued to Zenith executives, and the Senate called for an emergency intelligence hearing. The silence was cracking. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing room was quiet, but the tension in the air was almost physical. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters filled the gallery. Aides whispered behind folders. At the center of it all sat Rachel Monroe, adjusting her blazer, preparing for another storm. To her left was Imran Latif, invited as a key witness after his Al Jazeera segment went viral overnight. To her right, empty chairs reserved for Zenith Global Defense executives, who had refused to appear, citing national security concerns. At the far end of the room sat the committee chair, Senator Howard Graves, known for his hawkish stance on defense and surveillance programs. He looked up from his papers and narrowed his eyes at Rachel. "Ms. Monroe," he said into the mic, "you are here because you made serious accusations. You've claimed that a defense contractor has manipulated our legal system, spied on civilians, and even placed assets within the judiciary. Do you have proof?" Rachel leaned forward slowly. Her voice was calm but clear. "Yes, Senator, we do." She opened a binder and passed it to the aides. Inside were transcripts, metadata, trails, internal memos, all connecting Zenith's private security division with operations labeled Silent Wire and Project Orpheus. Imran chimed in. We've verified these documents through multiple independent cybersecurity experts in Germany and Turkey. The metadata shows clear manipulation of digital records involving whistleblowers, political donors, and even to former senators. Graves held up one document. And this mentions Judge Malcolm Strickland directly. Rachel nodded. He approved covert surveillance warrants under a closed FISA extension program. All of them tied back to Zenith contractors. He was also given speaking payments through a consultancy called Delos Strategies. On paper, it's clean, but Delos is a shell, fully owned by Zenith's foreign subsidiary. The room went quiet. Behind the scenes, aides began passing notes. Phones buzzed quietly. Then, Senator Graves asked, "Do you understand the consequences of what you're saying, Ms. Monroe?" Rachel held his gaze. Yes, but do you? That evening, cable news exploded. Rachel's face was on every screen. Headlines read, "Whistleblower trial turns into national scandal as the U.S. judiciary compromised." Global executives in hiding. Meanwhile, Judge Strickland appeared on a late-night interview with a conservative news outlet, calling the accusations theatrical slander. He spoke confidently, but viewers noted the sweat on his collar and the way he avoided naming Zenith at all. But the real damage came the next morning. An encrypted USB drive was delivered, anonymously to the office of Senator Graves. Inside surveillance footage of a private dinner between Judge Strickland, Zenith CEO Nathan Kessler, and two unnamed men. The conversation was partially distorted, but clear enough. One voice. "If Monroe doesn't back off, we activate." The fallback. Another voice. "She fold." They always fold when the family gets the call. The final voice. "Strickland's got it under control." One more hearing, then we bury it. Graves watched the footage 5 times, and then he made the call to open a full federal investigation. That night, Rachel walked into her apartment and noticed the silence was too perfect. Her dog didn't run to the door. The lights were off. Her hand reached for the switch and paused. On the table was a photo. It was of her and her younger brother, taken years ago. The frame had been cracked. The message below was handwritten in red ink. "Back off, or he disappears." Rachel didn't scream. She didn't panic. She took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and called Echo. "We're in the endgame now," she said. On the other end of the line, Echo's voice was steady. "Then burn the last lock. Release the final file." Within hours, a new anonymous drop appeared on the dark web. It was titled "Judicial Assets, U.S. Federal Level, Tier A," and Judge Malcolm Strickland was at the top of the list. Washington, D.C. woke up in panic. By 7 a.m., the leaked document titled "Judicial Assets, Tier A" had already spread to major news outlets and social media platforms. It contained names, offshore accounts, code communications, and a direct line from private defense contractors to federal judges, including Malcolm Strickland. The file hit harder than anyone expected. CNN aired an emergency panel. BBC called it the most damaging leak in judicial history. Jazeera ran the headline, "Private Justice. How deep does it go?" Meanwhile, at a secure location outside the city, Rachel Monroe sat in a windowless safe house, her laptop open, her hands steady. Echo had disappeared again. No trace, no ping. But Rachel knew she was still out there watching. Across the table sat Imran Latif, scrolling through reaction footage. "You know what this means?" he said. "They'll throw the entire weight of the intelligence community at us. If these connections are real, judges, senators, even foreign partners, then this isn't just a trial. It's a global firewall. Breaking down." Rachel nodded. "And now they'll have no choice but to strike back." They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, Senator Howard Graves announced a closed-door intelligence briefing. The White House released a vague but tense statement. "While we are concerned about the security of legal institutions, we caution the public not to jump to conclusions based on incomplete information." But Rachel knew the statement wasn't meant for the public. It was a warning to her. Inside the Senate building, classified discussions revealed that Project Orpheus, the same black file Echo had referenced, was a real classified operation, jointly run by U.S., British, and Israeli intelligence agencies. Stated goal: behavioral disruption and information control in the interest of national stability. But in practice, it was used to silence journalists, activists, foreign reformers, and anyone seen as a threat to strategic interests. Rachel's case had just pulled the thread that could unravel it all. The next day, another shockwave hit. In Geneva, the UN Human Rights Council convened an emergency session after a parallel set of leaked files appeared on European servers. These showed illegal data sharing between Zenith Global and intelligence agencies operating in Nigeria, Yemen, and eastern Ukraine, all under the umbrella of counterterrorism. A UN official from the Netherlands stood before the assembly and read out loud, "We now have evidence that American-funded private contractors violated both international law and sovereign territory under the justification of undisclosed protocols. These documents suggest a global shadow program with no oversight and no accountability." Across capitals, alarms rang. France suspended all security tech contracts with Zenith. Germany launched a parliamentary investigation. The African Union demanded sanctions. But back in the U.S., the chaos only deepened. In Washington, Rachel received an encrypted message. Sender: just one sentence, you missed one. Look into Black Cross Geneva. She quickly contacted Echo through a burner system they had built months ago. The signal bounced through 7 countries. Echo responded within minutes. Black Cross was not in any government system. It was a private satellite node, run out of a Zenith-owned lab hidden inside a pharmaceutical front in Switzerland. It stored backdoor surveillance from all partner nations, meaning no oversight, no deletion, no trace. Rachel called Imran immediately. "If we expose this, if Black Cross is real, it proves they were building a global eye." He paused. "We won't just be targets, we'll be enemies of state." Rachel replied coldly, "Then let's give the world a reason to choose sides." At midnight, Rachel uploaded a heavily redacted version of the Black Cross files to a secured media hub in Europe. At the same time, Imran went live on Al Jazeera English with a breaking news package titled "The Eye That Never Closed." Inside, Black Cross Geneva. The segment showed blurred images of satellite feeds, internal email exchanges between us and foreign defense reps, and a secret Zenith presentation titled "Silent Sovereignty." It claimed total surveillance was not just a strategy, it was a product. The next morning, the world had changed again. Protests broke out in London, Paris, and Islamabad. 2 Zenith offices were raided by Swiss authorities. And a bipartisan group of U.S. senators called for immediate hearings. Judge Malcolm Strickland, now officially under investigation, released a video statement from a private location. These are dangerous lies being weaponized to dismantle the very structures that protect our democracy. But no one was buying it anymore. That same night, an anonymous whistleblower from inside the Department of Defense sent Rachel one final document titled Only Athena Protocol. Phase 0, Judicial Sabotage and Media Disruption Plan. She opened it. Her eyes froze. At the top of the file, Target 001, Rachel Monroe. Status: Active Interference Approved. And just like that, the hunt had officially begun. The rain fell hard that night in Washington, streaking across the bulletproof windows of the safe house. Rachel Monroe sat alone at the table, staring at the top of the Athena Protocol file. The document was chilling, not just because it listed her name as a threat to operational stability, but because it confirmed something far more terrifying. This wasn't just about silencing her. It was about destroying her credibility, her life, her voice. The file outlined psychological interference techniques, false social media posts, synthetic recordings of her making threats. planted financial irregularities, manipulated health records, digital assassination. And if that didn't work, physical elimination was conditionally authorized. Somewhere in the system, someone had signed off on her death in the name of stability. Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a private signal. From Echo 3 dots and a blinking cursor. Then came the message. Phase 0 has begun. You must move now. They've activated Orpheus fallback. The next morning, the media turned violently. News outlets that had praised Rachel now questioned her mental state. Is the whistleblower's lawyer cracking under pressure? Sources suggest Monroe may have falsified evidence. Rachel Monroe, hero or hysteric. Even Al Jazeera received a threat to suspend Imran Latif's press credentials in the U.S. He was advised to leave the country within 48 hours, but Imran stayed. We're too deep now, he said. If they win this round, we disappear from history. Rachel nodded. Then we take it back to the courtroom, but this time in public view. No closed sessions, no filtered feeds. That afternoon, Rachel filed a petition to reopen the federal hearing with full transparency. She requested live coverage, citing national interest and protection of whistleblower integrity. The motion was risky. No lawyer had ever tried it at this scale, but the judge assigned wasn't Strickland. A new judge had replaced him. Judge Aria Levine Younger, sharp and fiercely independent. Levine granted the motion. The hearing would go forward. Cameras would be allowed. Witnesses protected. Zenith Global would be subpoenaed under emergency. Order. 3 days later, the courtroom was a fortress. News vans lined the street. Protesters held signs outside. We see you. Zenith's truth is not a threat inside. Rachel stood again at the podium. This time, she didn't just speak. As a lawyer, she spoke as a woman who had survived the system's attempt to erase her. Your Honor, she said, the evidence before you is not only about corporate crime, it is about a global protocol that has replaced law with influence. That has turned intelligence into a marketplace. That has named truth-tellers as enemies. She turned toward the screen where Echo would appear, virtually fully masked, her voice filtered but unmistakably real. I was part of it, Echo said. I watched names be added to kill lists. I saw judges, journalists, elected officials labeled as targets of disruption. Rachel Monroe was on that list before she even met me. The courtroom was silent, not a cough, not a whisper. Then Rachel dropped the final bombshell, a flash. Doctor, this, she said, contains the full audio from a call between Malcolm Strickland and Zenith CEO Nathan Kessler. Recorded on a secure channel Echo accessed before her defection. She played the recording. Kessler, if she gets to open that case file, everything collapses. Strickland, what about Orpheus fallback? Kessler, in progress. She will make it to final testimony. We'll trigger Athena. Filled the room. Strickland's voice was unmistakable. Back at Zenith headquarters, chaos erupted. The board demanded answers. Nathan Kessler was nowhere to be found. A federal warrant was issued. Interpol was notified. Rachel had flipped the chessboard. That evening, Echo sent a final message. Athena is compromised. Their playbook is exposed. But beware, they have one last move. If they can't erase you, they'll try to break the system you're standing in, Rachel replied. Let them try. I've already torn down the veil. The world watched. And the final hearing was now just hours away. The sky over Washington, D.C. was gray, heavy with storm clouds as the final hearing began. The courthouse was surrounded by federal agents, journalists, and silent protesters holding signs that read, "Truth is on trial and protect Echo. Protect us." Inside, the courtroom lights were brighter than usual. Every seat was filled. The cameras were rolling, live on global networks. For the first time in modern U.S. history, a federal court was fully transparent in a case involving national intelligence, defense contractors, and judicial corruption. At the front of the courtroom stood RachelMonroe.com, but focused. Voice had already shaken governments, forced resignations, and turned her into a symbol of resistance. But today, she would deliver the full truth, not just for Echo, not just for justice, but for history. Judge Aria Levine entered. The room stood. The session was officially open. Rachel opened with a single sentence. This courtroom is no longer about guilt or innocence. It is about silence versus survival. She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up. Slide by slide. She explained how Zenith Global had created a parallel system of justice, one not bound by law, but by contracts, power, and untraceable influence. She revealed Black Cross Geneva, Project Orpheus, Athena Protocol, and the private surveillance nodes that monitored everything from journalist travelogues to private medical records. Then came the witness list. An anonymous intelligence tech from Canada, testifying virtually. A former Zenith contractor who had fled to Argentina, appearing under heavy voice distortion. And finally, Echo. The screen went black for a moment, then lit up. Echo's face was hidden, her voice filtered. But the courtroom leaned in, hanging on every word. I worked inside the machine, she said. I wrote parts of the Athena Code. I watched names be added to disruption programs, lawyers, teachers, pastors, students, people who spoke inconvenient truths. She paused. Rachel Monroe was listed 6 months before she ever took this case. The system already knew she would be a threat because the system watches potential, not just action. The courtroom murmured. Even the judge leaned forward. Do you have evidence of that targeting? Judge Levine asked. Echo replied, yes. It's been uploaded to the court archive under emergency classification. Access code AGX 140. Levine turned to the clerk, who nodded. The files had already been verified. Then Rachel made her final move. She stepped forward and pulled out a sealed envelope. She opened it slowly, revealing a signed affidavit from a U.S. senator, a man still in office. His signature confirmed that he had received donations and private intelligence from Zenith Global in exchange for blocking whistleblower protection legislation. It was a confession. She placed it on the bench and said this was not one bad contractor. This was an ecosystem, and the roots go deep. Judge Levine paused, her face unreadable. Then she said something that no one expected. I've just been informed that 2 Zenith executives have been arrested attempting to flee via private airfield outside Denver. A third is in custody in Geneva. The courtroom held its breath. I will allow final statements. Then I will issue a ruling. Rachel stood again. I was told to shut up. I was told to back down. But I stood here today because justice doesn't need permission. It needs persistence. Her voice cracked slightly, but her eyes stayed sharp. This case is not the end of corruption, but it is the end of silence. Echo's screen flickered. Then her voice came one last time. I may disappear after this, but if I do, let it be known the system couldn't erase us. It only made us louder. Judge Levine closed her binder and looked directly at Rachel. This court finds that the evidence presented not only demonstrates criminal misconduct by Zenith Global Defense, but also systemic violations of constitutional rights. She banged the gavel. The court recommends full federal prosecution and congressional oversight effective immediately. The room exploded, cameras flashing, people cheering, others weeping. Outside, the crowd watching on screens began chanting Rachel's name. That night, Rachel sat on a bench near the reflecting pool alone. The world had heard her. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like survival. Her phone buzzed. One last message. Echo, they'll rebuild the system someday. Be ready, because they'll come wearing new masks. Rachel stared at the water, the city lights reflecting off its surface. She replied, then we'll just tear it down again. The air in Washington had changed. Days after the courtroom decision, the city moved with a strange mix of relief and unease. like people were breathing easier, but also watching the sky. What Rachel Monroe had done wasn't just legal history. It had torn off a mask the world wasn't ready to see. Zenith Global Defense was no longer just a company. It was now a criminal entity under investigation in 3 continents. 17 senior officials had been arrested for fled. 2 were missing. Interpol had issued red notices. Swiss regulators froze accounts. And in the U.S., a Senate special committee began a full-scale inquiry into Project Orpheus and the influence of private defense firms on the judicial system. But for Rachel, the spotlight brought no peace. She was offered interviews, book deals, even a potential documentary. She turned them all down. "I didn't do this to become famous," she told Imran Latif one evening. "I did this because they made silence the law. And someone had to break it." They sat together in a quiet part of the National Mall. The sky above them was dark, but peaceful now. Imran looked down at his phone. Echo's gone completely dark. "Even the last server we used has been wiped." Rachel nodded. "That was always the plan. What happens now?" he asked. Rachel took a deep breath. "We stay alert. The system's wounded, not dead." 3 weeks later, a quiet ceremony took place at the European Parliament. Rachel was awarded the International Freedom of Information Medal for exceptional courage in defense of public truth. She gave no speech. She simply stood, bowed her head, and stepped off the stage. Back home, she returned to her office, untouched since the first court hearing. As she turned the lights on, the silence felt eerie. Her inbox was overflowing. Letters of support, threats, inquiries, offers, apologies. But one envelope sat on her desk with no name, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No logo, no signature. A line of text. "Athena, Phase 2 was never deactivated. Look into Parallax." Rachel felt her breath catch. The warning was clear. The courtroom victory may have exposed one operation, but the machine had more layers, more faces, and it was already moving again. Later that night, Rachel met with Imran in his apartment. He had begun work on a long-form documentary series. Titled "The Systems That Watch Us," he held up the paper. "Parallax, you think it's another protocol?" Rachel shook her head. "I think it's the next phase." Athena was about silencing threats. Parallax might be about shaping the world that comes after. He leaned back, eyes darkening. "Control the collapse to control the rebuild." Rachel nodded. They didn't lose. They just adjusted. In Geneva, a private corporate meeting was taking place underground. No press, no names, just shadows. In tailored suits. One voice said, "We underestimated her." Another replied, "It won't happen again." On the wall, a screen lit up with a new file name. Parallax Protocol, Operational Seed Points, Media Currency Law. The camera zoomed in on a name under Tier 1 disruptors. Rachel Monroe status. Active surveillance resumed. But Rachel wasn't waiting to be hunted. She had already begun assembling a new team. Lawyers, tech analysts, former journalists, ethical hackers, and even 1 or 2 unexpected allies from inside intelligence. She called them simply Echo Line. Their mission, track and expose covert systems before they grow powerful enough to silence again. In her final meeting with Imran, before he left for Istanbul to follow a new lead, she handed him a flash drive. "This is the Athena archive. Everything. Use it when you need to, not before." Imran smiled. "You trust me that much?" She looked at him, serious but warm. "I trust the truth more." As dawn rose over D.C., Rachel stepped out into the light. No fanfare, no cameras. Just a woman who had stood in front of power and refused to back down. She walked past a newspaper. Stand. The headline read, "Courtroom Hero Returns Quietly," but new conspiracy brews, she didn't stop to read it. She already knew the truth. The silence had broken. But the war for truth had only just begun.